welcome to the virtual edition of Film Independent Presents, our year-round screening program here at Film Independent. I'm Josh Welsh, I'm the president of Film Independent, and I'm so happy to be here in conversation with filmmakers Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht to discuss their film Crip Camp. Before we get started, I just want to identify myself a bit. I am a middle-aged white guy with brown hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a scarf, and like many people on Zoom, I'm sitting in front of a bunch of books to make myself look smart. Before we get started, also, I want to give some praise and thanks to Film Independent supporters. First off, thank you to our incredible lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. We love you guys and are so grateful to your year-round support for making this program possible. Also, thanks to our screening partner, Vision Media, whose platform we do all of our screenings. It's fantastic for anyone looking for a platform. I recommend checking out Vision Media. And thank you to our media partner, the Los Angeles Times. And if you're watching this not live, but later on, either on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you might be finding this, I just want to urge you all, if you're not familiar with Film Independent, check out our website, filmindependent.org. We're a Los Angeles-based film arts organization that supports independent filmmakers. We support a community that embodies diversity, innovation, and uniqueness of vision. And we champion creative independence and visual storytelling, whatever form or platform that may take. With that lengthy preamble, I just want to say again how happy I am to welcome our guests, writers, directors, producers, Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht. Nicole and Jim, thank you so much for taking time to talk about Crip Camp. I just out the gate just want to say how much I love this film, what a delight it was to watch. I'd heard a lot of good things about it, but when I watched it, I was, it like great documentary filmmaking, it surprised me in so many ways. I learned so much about about the camp, about the passage to ADA, about the people from the camp, and about Jim, about your life. There was so much I learned, but it was also an incredibly enjoyable film and joyful film. And that's actually my first question is I want to start. I feel like the film, you plunk us down right at the beginning of the film in the camp, and it is joyful and anarchic, and the tone is, it's about kids trying to get laid and smoke cigarettes and playing Grateful Dead and just like that liberation of summer camp the way it should be. I just love to hear you, either or both of you talk about how you decided to start the film, setting that tone and just putting the audience in that world.
Go ahead, Nicole, please.
We felt really passionately about using the first act of the film in the camp to really immerse the viewer in an experience, and partly what we were trying to do all the way along in making the film was fight the kind of media stereotypes, which too often are the only way in which people with disabilities are seen, which is either this sort of like inspiration porn thing or this sort of like disability is a tragedy thing. And so we felt like, once we stumbled upon this incredible footage from the People's Video Theater that was shot in 1971 at Jim's camp, we felt we had this opportunity to really give the viewer their own experience of going to camp, finding themselves, as you say, just kind of like a friend of ours described it as like you land on a planet and you don't speak the language and you're not quite sure what's going on, but you sort of discover for yourself that after about 20 minutes, you feel at home, you've made friends, and somehow you speak the language, And so that was what we were really privileged to work with some just fantastic cinema verite documentary editors to be able to kind of craft this experience where we're both kind of putting you back on your heels a little bit and confronting you with some things that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable or surprise you and you're not quite sure how you're going to handle it, but then also just kind of like grabbing you by the hand and pulling you in and saying like, this is going to be an amazing good time. And it's a community and a kind of like a party that you want to be a part of.
It reminded me of, unfortunately don't remember the exact quote, but there's that famous quote that's often attributed to Emma Goldman. What was it? If you can't dance, it's not my revolution, or something like that. And I feel like, that's where this film embodies, is that spirit, and definitely that beginning seeing, I mean, Jim, seeing the 15 version of you at that camp and all of your friends and everything going on, there's just that raucous energy where, I don't know if you want to add to that or talk about what that experience was like.
Sure. Just my image description. I'm a 65-year-old white guy with kind of square glasses on, and my hair looks like I refuse to forget who I was when I was 15. It's kind of long still. And I got a maroon shirt on and with a red wall behind me with some posters. You know, so first of all, Camp Jeanette, it wasn't like there was like orgies every night, okay? So, I mean, there was order. But indeed, I'm so happy to hear you talk about joy and seeing the joy in this film, because I think that that is something that, as Nicole was alluding to, you don't think about when you think about disability. But that's what we really found at that camp. And you know, look, Camp Jeanette in 1971, when I was there, it was really, you know, a project of the time of the anti-war movement, of social upheaval, so many different liberation movements. And you know, the counselors and the staff, they were all people that were very cognizant of this and part of it. And they wanted us to have a good time. They wanted us to be teenagers and young adults. And you know, it was, you want to go behind the bunk and make out with your girlfriend? Okay, you got 15 minutes. You know, it's like, we'll come back and get you. And Lord knows that was not the way it was at other camps, where we were really treated like almost medically, like patients and infantilized. And so many of us, and you see this in the film, talked about, we're isolated in our lives, that we didn't have any independence. We didn't have any agency. And, you know, besides, you know, making sure we had fun and we had great activities, you know, we had that freedom to make decisions for ourselves and to go places and not be terribly structured and to really start to learn to become who we really are. And that is the beauty of this place. And that is why Denise Jacobson in our film says it was our utopia. And because of that experience, it motivated so many of us to feel a sense that we did have power and we had something to say. And that's what helped spark our particular part of the disabled civil rights and the independent living movement.
So throughout the film, I mean, the name of the film is Crip Camp. So it's you know, part of the film is it's about the film, but and the legacy of, about the camp and the legacy of it, the people that you met there, who then you maintained contact with and who at every point were there in the movement and taking action. And I mean, that is a remarkable thing. And the film does a great job of showing that, but it's still so striking, even after watching the film, to think, oh my God, all these people were at this camp. And they just, I mean, I'm curious, like, was the camp director, like, what is the reason for that? Was it just the times and it was just this confluence of events where these people happened to be there and then became leaders in the movement? Or was the camp really unique in that the leader of the camp sort of attracted that or drove it? Or how do you explain that legacy? Because it's really unusual and beautiful.
I think it really was a product of the times and a certain amount of, let's say, kismet. Mm-hmm. And as you get introduced to Judy Heumann in our film, who goes on to become and still is an international leader in disability rights, you know, her being there at the camp, first of my personal experience was, it changed me. It changed me. Besides being 15 and having a crush on her, it was more like, oh my God, here's somebody who sued the New York City School District for a teaching position, even though she's a wheelchair user, and she won. And for the first time, it's like, what you mean that we can actually fight back against these things that are unfair and that, you know, really are, you know, are keeping us down? And yes, we can. And so, you know, Judy talked about to us how, you know, at night in the girls' bunk, you know, they would talk about things like you can't get in public transportation, and we don't have any rights, and seeing these other liberation movements, and that we needed one of our own. So, and indeed, you know, the other staff members certainly were very politically aware. But I think that you find that even people like Lionel, who came from the Deep South, kind of said this place is like a bubble of freedom. I mean, I think it was a revolution, but a revelation for so many of the people that were good fortune to come together at that place.
I think, I don't know if you remember, but when we flash back to Judy Heuman's backstory after you meet her in that scene where she's wrangling the lasagna dinner, she talks about actually like how she met a number of those friends from Camp Jeanette who we end up tracing throughout their life and moving out to California and getting involved in the movement back in the 3rd grade when they were the downstairs kids. And even when they were that young, they were finding power in solidarity with each other and power in kind of discussing their common experiences of oppression, and also power in accommodating each other and giving each other what they each need according to their disability. So somebody like Nancy Rosenblum, who's that woman who has the speech impediment, who's trying to, talk at that beautiful roundtable scene and is listened to so patiently and beautifully by everyone, and makes this, powerful speech about not having privacy. She is seen as a valuable person in conversations by Judy and her friends in the 3rd grade. So by the time they are teenagers and they get to camp and they meet this group of, cultural revolutionaries who are like, hey man, why don't we treat everybody the same, and really walk the talk here? It's just like this beautiful kind of combustible thing that happened, I think. Larry Allison, who was the camp director, told a story that we didn't include in the film about having this revelation one day. He was at a bar and a disabled guy came in and ordered a beer, and the bartender refused to serve him. And Larry just had this kind of aha moment, like, what must it be like to be treated like that? And gravitated towards, working with people with disabilities and found his way to this camp. But I think that, were he to have had that aha moment, and it wasn't in this particular time when people were really thinking like, we can reinvent society, we really can do something different here, maybe this wouldn't have happened, and maybe the movement wouldn't have played out like it did. And that was one of the most seductive, kind of wonderful things about working on this project, was being able to kind of like try to capture and elevate something that otherwise could have just been this kind of like ephemeral thing that lived in the hearts and minds of, Jim and his friends, but didn't become known, and yet really was such a pivotal moment in the history of what came later.
Yeah. Those shots you referred to, the flashback to, or the shots from Judy when she was in 3rd grade with her friends, that really was so striking in the film. This runs through the whole film, but I remember that moment and thinking, it's like the film celebrates and showcases the power of the individual, just the ordinary humans who are there and follow through and take action. It's the power of individual protest and political action. I'm so obviously sensitive to this thought right now, just having come through the election, where you see how close things were, and like the individual vote matters. The kid in 3rd grade who goes on to speak up at camp and then follow through, it matters, and it can have this profound impact. It's really inspiring in the best non-cheesy way of that word to me.
You never know what's going to happen, right? You make a film and it goes out into the world, and then we find ourselves in this time of COVID and all of the horrible things kind of that we're confronting now in our society. And then somebody says, if you want to see an example of how people can just get out in the streets and make change, watch Crip Camp.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that is really freaking awesome, because, and on top of everything else, it's like society has really viewed people with disabilities as being subtractive versus additive, a burden versus an asset. And so to not only say that here's a good example, but, by the way, like, we were a bunch of people with disabilities doing this. So like, reset your mind. Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you both a question about language. So the title of the film is Crip Camp, And then throughout the film, because it's archival footage over a long period of time, you hear all the different terms for what now is, people with disabilities or the disabled community. You have handicapped and crippled and, and then the film embraces, the Crip Camp. Like I just would love to hear you talk about how you approached how you decided on the title, but also more broadly, how were you thinking about the language in which to talk about the disabled community in the film?
Maybe I'd start off about the title, and then the other part. Obviously, you want a really great title for a film, kind of catch people's attention, and for myself and a lot of people in the disabled community, not everybody, we use this word crip as a way to reclaim the word cripple. That it was such a slur and demeaning term, and for me, look, disability is my culture. I have a shared experience with a number of other people, and a lot of other people, we kind of feel the same way about it. So, you hear about writing, and it's called Crip Lit, and even when we had a screening at MoMA before the pandemic locked us down, we were going to say the Cripperati rather of New York were there, and Corbett O'Toole in the film. I remember her saying to me that when I first got him out, "Did you go to Crip Camp?" And it simply also was just shorthand. And so when my wife Sarah and I are going out, there's a Crip spot over there. We'll take that blue parking spot. Okay, so there's something very serious, and also, it's kind of shorthand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for us, again, like we really realized as we tried to kind of put the film together and raise money for it and get it out there, that we really were up against the way people were traditionally used to viewing stories around disability, to the extent that like one time we're at Sundance and Jim says to somebody like, well, I'm working on a film about this summer camp I went to in the 1970s. And this person said, oh, and Jim's like, no, like I went there to smoke pot with the counselors. You don't understand, So we needed a title that was in your face. And really, it's kind of, like I really love the Emma Goldman thing you said earlier, but that really is the spirit of the community writ large, even today, but definitely like was the spirit of that camp. And this is a kind of a badass movement with a punk spirit, and these things wouldn't have happened if people weren't like that. And so we really couldn't afford to have a title that didn't kind of announce that, but also there was even an added benefit to having a title that would put people a little bit back on their heels, which is a stance that we tried to have the film take, throughout. We were embracing the sense that in a lot of moments in the film, the viewer would feel a little bit at sea, and that would hopefully give them kind of like an actual experience, of confronting discomfort and getting beyond it. And so, we held fast to the title decision. We got a lot of pushback around it. And people weren't too sure, how it was going to fly. And we still get people, a lot of times when we're doing Q&As saying like, I'm not so sure how I feel about that. But Jim at one point kind of made this passionate speech and said, like, if people don't really understand the title, then that's the job of the film. The job of the film is to introduce people to the fact that, like, yes, there is a disability community and it has a culture and it has reappropriated this term and it uses it proudly, and that's a thing. So
so the film is mercifully free of talking heads. It's constructed out of so much archival material, and I'm sure that making the film in the editing process and choosing what was going to be in it and what wasn't must have been an incredible task for you as filmmakers. But I just wanted, a couple of questions about that. Well, first of all, on a personal note, Jim, how recent, had you seen that footage from the camp before you started the film much, or was it like a revelation to you? And how did that feel to see yourself as a 15-year-old in that footage?
I had only had a vague memory that these people had showed up at camp, and at that point when we first started the film, it had been like 45 years previous. but no, I hadn't seen it. There had been a video that was made about the crab epidemic at the camp that had wound up. There was like a third generation VHS because it had been on Manhattan Cable.
Bootleg
That-
crab tape.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and but no, it was like opening a time capsule.
Wow.
Absolutely, like opening a time capsule, and very, very, very bittersweet, because you realize this is incredible footage, and no one's really seen disabled youth like this and this kind of community in this light. But also, I really miss a lot of people. I think anybody, I'm sorry if you're 64 and you get a chance to see this much footage of your time when you were 15, you're going to feel melancholy about that and all the time that's gone by. And I'm certainly, I've certainly felt that a great deal. But then I also got to go back to camp day after day after day during the making of the film, and I feel very fortunate about that.
Yeah. So as filmmakers, well, let me ask you, forgive me, I'm forgetting the name of the group that did what was it called? People's
Video Theater.
People's Video Theater. My God, what a great name. Yeah, I'm not familiar with them. I feel like I should be, because I feel like they must have been, that was the early days of independent documentary film in San Francisco at that time, right? Or
They were based in New York.
They were in New
York. Yeah, they were right near the camp, actually. I mean, they did a lot of filming in New York City, but then they were also up in the Catskills and around Woodstock. The two guys who still we collaborated with, on this project, they were generous enough to let us use the footage and consulted with us, Howard Gutstadt and Ben Levine, and there were a couple of other guys originally part of the group. And we found the footage by finding a tiny little notice about the crabs tape in the back of an early, Radical Video Makers magazine. But this was like the early Portapack video, tube video, black and white video, and somehow it miraculously survived. And the Bay Area Video Coalition was halfway through transferring it when we contacted them, and so we transferred the rest and got a hard drive from them. But their whole mission was to empower communities by having these pop-up, what they called video theaters, where they'd have the sort of big monitor and the camera hooked up to it live, and they would interview people and film people in community settings, and then those people would get to see themselves on TV. So it was all about the transformational power of being able to see yourself differently, which is why we cut that little scene, which is one of my favorite scenes in the film, of the campers like looking at the monitor and seeing themselves kind of on TV for the first time,
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of of what's unique and powerful about the filming and the film is actually that it's kind of that somewhat naive response that people had in the 70s to being able to see themselves on film or on TV for the first time. There's such a, just sort of like the way people are grabbing the microphone and speaking direct to camera and all of that. It's really unmediated, I think, compared to today. And it just makes you feel like you're right there with everybody. But the People's Video Theater ethos was such a beautiful match for what we wanted to accomplish as filmmakers, that that we really did have this sense that we were kind of picking up the work 50 years later and
Amazing.
trying to carry it forward.
So I imagine that was one of the main sources of footage that you had. And then additionally, I mean, there's obviously a lot of different sources, but then was another major one for you, the ABC reporter from the Bay Area who was never stopped filming and went to DC.
Well, yes, we did have some of his stuff in there, but not very much, because the archive, a lot of local news archives, news stations can't afford to kind of maintain an archive. And the station he worked for had given their archive to some other person, and who had like an archive, I think it was on like a military base or something, and it burned down. So his entire collection had burned. And so we had to just go to sort of extraordinary lengths to find fragments of it on like old edit tapes of, documentaries that other people had made in the past. And And some of it because, you know, there's that story in the film of the technician strike and the footage going national. Because of that, we eventually found some of it in the ABC archives. So little fragments of it were part of it, but really we were piecing together from, you know, tons of different sources. We had an incredible couple of archive researchers working with us, and it literally took, I mean, 3-4 years for all those tiny little pieces to emerge. And sometimes in, you know, a scene of, say, the 504 sit-in that has like 6 shots in it, each shot came from a different source, you know, and we were color correcting to try to make it look fluid and to be able to give you that kind of immersive feeling, like to be able to create something like the scene where Judy's saying like, who here can sleep on the floor? And she says it in exactly the same way that, you know, you hear her wrangling the lasagna dinner at camp. We really wanted people to kind of be able to kind of make those connections themselves by creating immersive scenes. But like, we really didn't know until, you know, years in and scraps of footage later that we were going to be able to pull that off.
Well, I mean, it really is a testament to your filmmaking skills. I feel like there were so many characters in this film, but I never felt lost. And I always wanted to know more about them. I mean, like the camp director, Judy, like I could watch a whole film about her. I mean, you know, Jim, I could watch a whole film about you. There were so many people at the camp in the 504 demonstration. When you get to Califano in DC, like there's a broadening scope to what's happening, but you as filmmakers, you hone in on particular people with whatever footage you had in a way that they pop on the screen, and I'm just like, oh my God, that's a great subject. So that's a comment more than a question, but it made the film so compelling. And so how long was that like when you started to make the film and knew you were working with archival footage, how long was that entire process?
You know, I think that from our first conversation till kind of handing it off at the end of last year, it was a good 5 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I mean, briefly, I could tell you that, you know, I've been working in documentary film as a mixer for many years, and I had worked for Nicole as her mixer and such, and she was wrapping up her last film, Revolutionary Optimist. I asked her to lunch because I wanted to talk to her about films that I wasn't seeing as a disabled person and an activist, and also somebody working in documentary films. And I almost kind of sheepishly said, you know, at the end of the conversation, I think there may be a story here about an important story about this summer camp I went to in the disabled civil rights movement. And we said, you know, take it away. You know, I have a great time. And fortunately, this grabbed her.
It did, but you know what also grabbed me was, you know, the idea of working with Jim and the idea that Jim could tell this story, you know, from his personal point of view, and also that Jim had been basically in film school, sitting there watching all of our, you know, films cross his mixing board for 20 years. And so, and also just the fact that like there haven't been a lot of documentaries by filmmakers with disabilities about disability civil rights history, you know, so that altogether seemed as exciting as the story to me. And, you know, part of what I wanted to do was honestly like have a good time with Jim. I mean, I was so excited to work on a film that I knew would have humor and music and, you know, this kind of iconoclastic sensibility that I associate with Jim. So I said, you know, would you co-direct this film with me? And that was probably my best decision.
I honestly was not expecting it. It was so like, wow, that'll be, yeah, let's do it. Yeah. Thank you again, Nicole.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. So the film it feels, I mean, and it is the way it's made. It's an insider's perspective on this. Like your immediate. So at the beginning of the film, maybe I don't think am I getting this right? There's the scene of, is it a new counselor's going on the bus, and he's like suddenly he sees all the disabled people on the bus, and he's kind of thrown back. And then there's this great line. It was like somebody put his hand on his back and pushed him forward, and that like carried him through the summer, or he just kept moving. whatever that line is. And I feel like that's the audience's experience too. Like we're the counselor being pushed into the world, like get ready. But the world is completely, it's disabled people telling their story. It's in their words. It's the political movement is coming from within. There's no top-down anything to it. It is truly grassroots political activism and just life, right? Life lived from the inside is what you get to experience in this film.
This is what we were starting, even at the Sundance lab that we were at, our advisors were saying, look, this is really from the inside. And that's really, amazing. And I also want to just circle back to the People's Video Theater. They could have come in there and talked to the camp director and said, Larry, tell us how you're taking care of these handicapped kids.
Yeah.
It was like they showed up and said, here's who we are. Let's help us. You want to make a film about your camp? And then we asked, okay, let's do this. We want to send a message to our parents. And that's where you have that incredible scene of us talking around the table. And you hear Nancy Rosenblum talking about never having privacy. And
yeah.
Yeah, where there are non-disabled points of view in the story, they're all kind of except for, of course, like Califano, standing on the table and pontificating. They're all all the people we interviewed, they're people who have become a part of the community, and feel deeply attached to it. And something that they're saying is indicating that. So, I mean, really, like the activists featured in the film wanted us to include Evan White, the cameraman, because they felt like he was an ally who had become a part of the community. And he said to us that, his involvement in telling that story, I mean, he was a beloved broadcast journalist for decades in the Bay Area. And he says that's the most important story that he ever worked on. And wow. I think, that initially our concept was just to focus on people from camp. But what we ended up discovering was that by broadening the scope and including characters, like Dennis Phillips, the African-American blind activist in the 504, Holland, DeLille, who actually, became disabled later on in life and found liberation and empowerment through becoming a part of the disability community, we were able to kind of, give this feeling of kind of a growing, expanding power base and expanding community that, started at Camp Jeanette. And that was the kind of what we started to think of. Instead of thinking of the film so much as like a 3-act structure, we thought of it as like a pebble in the water with ripples moving outward, and that gave us the ability to kind of like, or the way of knowing how could we bring other voices kind of into this, but still have it feel like this intimate story that's being told by a community to each other, with like all the joy and kind of openness and kind of open-heartedness that you have if you're sitting around in a circle, kind of remembering and relaying your story to each other.
I love that. It's so interesting to hear you say that, the image of the pebble in the pond. Because when the film started, I couldn't have guessed where it was going to end up. I thought I loved it from the beginning, but I was like, oh, this is this amazing world at this camp and these people are incredible. But when you get to the end, it really is that ripple effect. And I mean, to realize when Bush signs the ADA in that scene, it's like, oh my God, this is the story of how we got ADA. This is like, yes, it's the story of the camp, it's the story of these people, but I almost felt like I was tricked. I was like, oh my God, like where we end up is enormous. And then, and also emotionally, it's so powerful because you see, because of the way you handle all the footage, it covers this span of time where, yeah, Jim, it is bittersweet. I mean, well, it's beautiful because you see these people aging and like the way Judy's transformed in the role she now plays, and just you see all and the fact that these people have continued through their lives to fight for this and embody this is so powerful. But then of course you have that towards the end, you have the footage of the people who have died, and you're like, the sense of loss of like, yeah, this is the life of a community that you're watching from birth to death. And it's bittersweet and so powerful. Well, we have a number of questions here that have come in, so I can keep talking, but let me cut to some of these. Robert says, the film features an eclectic mix of classic and underappreciated songs. Did you face any challenges in licensing any of the music?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's various sundry stories about all of them, but I think that really one of the last songs that we got the rights to was Sugar Mountain, and simply kind of getting to the right people, because even though we had God bless Neil Young, and he's got 2 sons with cerebral palsy, and the bridge concerts that we all know about were to support the school they went to. His manager, I think that although we were able to get to him, I think just simply didn't really grasp what the film was about, and didn't appreciate that as well. And it took kind of an incredible moment in Nicole's connection of her son singing Sugar Mountain to her at her birthday party that led to a connection that somebody personally knew Neil's agent and said, no.
And what was amazing was that it was literally like a month before we picture locked.
Oh my God.
We were at the point of like subbing in other songs for it. And pretty much the whole scene was conjured up based on that song. I heard that song while we were cutting, and I was cooking dinner one night on a 70s radio station. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, it's the feeling of going back to camp. And it's autumn, and it's the autumn of your life. And, you could just feel the whole thing. And so, we had 3 amazing editors we worked with, and the first version of that scene was cut by an editor named Andrew Gersh, and he really captured that feeling starting to work with that song, and we could never. All the further iterations of it, that our other editors, Eileen Meyer and Mary Lamson, worked on, were just kind of building more and more on that feeling, to the extent that when we tried to put any other song in there, it was devastating to all of us. So the connection came through at the very, very end, and it seemed like it was fated and meant to be.
That's good.
Really thankful. Yeah.
So another question is, can you tell us more about President Obama's involvement? So the film is produced by Higher Ground, the Obama's production company, which I believe is at Netflix. Yeah, I'd love to hear how they got involved.
Well, we have this fantastic executive producer named Howard Gertler, and the minute he read about Higher Ground being set up at Netflix, he was calling us and saying, like, we have to try to get in touch with them, because Judy Heumann had worked in the Obama State Department. And also, the more we thought about it, there are so many themes in the film that are resonant with the values that the Obamas represent in terms of grassroots organizing and, the power of a small group of young people to change the world. And so we were able, through our sales agent, to get an early kind of sizzle reel that we had edited together to Priya Swaminathan when she came on board to run Higher Ground. And pretty soon she was on the phone with Jim and I saying, like, I don't know what's going on here, but I just keep watching this thing over and over and over again.
Great.
And she said, my boss feels the same way. So she came up and spent a bunch of time with us looking at all the scenes. And she said, we want to partner with you. We're really going to roll up our sleeves and make this film with you. And they did. I mean, they did. They were very hands-on, very supportive, very involved. And the Obamas themselves watched 3 cuts of the film and gave feedback, which was not prescriptive, but very instructive and interesting. So yeah, we loved working with them.
Wow, that's beautiful. Robert asks, he says, the film seamlessly transitions from the camp story to the larger story about the civil rights. Were there any other documentaries and or narrative films that inspired your structural approach to Crip Camp?
We often
I know what one of your inspirations were, so it's not up to me to say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, really from the very beginning, I was super inspired. From the minute Jim told me the story, I started thinking about my favorite documentary, which is The Times of Harvey Milk. which I feel like also does an incredible job of kind of using a very personal, character-based way of telling the story of a community and of a movement. And also it has this very intimate kind of way that the community is sharing the story with itself, and you feel like you become a part of it. But then we also talked about films like Wet Hot American Summer and The Breakfast Club. So sometimes in pitch meetings, we find ourselves saying that, like, think of this as Wet Hot American Summer meets The Times of Harvey Milk, which is something new. So
yeah.
Yeah, I've worked on, I've worked on so many documentaries over the years, and there's certain ones that have really touched me. And like Nicole said, I did feel like I've been in graduate school. And it's really not maybe why we're in the middle of doing all of this, but as I reflect back on this, that I feel like there's, I've been always inspired by the documentary We Were Here by David Weissman and Bill Weber. And it is just a look back and again, just from the voice of the community. And it is such a quiet, powerful film.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I could probably answer that question.
Okay. Well, so the film, of course, nobody could have predicted what was going to happen, but the film ended up coming out. Came out in March, correct? On Netflix?
Well, we were at Sundance in January.
Okay.
And fortunately, we were able to play True False and also have some screenings in New York, like at MoMA. But yeah, everything was locking down right around our release time.
So I'm sure it's so unforeseen and unpredictable, but my sense, just from being in the film world and talking to people, and the film has landed in a very powerful way and is resonating with audiences. And people, the reaction to this film is so palpable and strong. So I hope that's your experience of it too, and that I just love to hear you talk about your experience of the film coming out in the world and what it's been like connecting with audiences on it. It's not in the normal way with a theatrical release or theatrical audience that you might expect, but how has it been for you seeing the film come out in the world? And specifically, what I'm trying to say inarticulately is, the film is about this, among other things, this political movement, political action. People, watching it now, talking about it now in the midst of this election madness, it's like, it is a beautiful expression of citizens taking action and changing the world for the better. And how do you see the film playing into that? Like, what do you want? What impact do you want this film to have? How can people take this film and go further? Something like that.
I'm sorry. Our goal, I think, was to really do a couple of things. One of them was to reframe how people thought about disability, and not just for the non-disabled, but for people with disabilities also. To spark conversation we had a word on the wall, literally, that was the word community. And so I think that's about representing the community, but creating community also.
Yeah, it's like helping people see that, community, and by that, that we mean like being willing to understand that somebody else's experience is different than your own, and trust them and believe them when they tell you what they need and what they're experiencing, and find ways of connecting and supporting each other across those differences, which is what's so especially beautiful and powerful in disability community. That kind of ability to create kind of a fabric of solidarity and common understanding is not just like something that helps social movements, but it actually is, it's a must-have. It's like a fundamental part of actually making change. And I feel like we've seen so many beautiful examples of that since the film launched, and so I think we have heard from a lot of people that they're sort of, saying, don't doubt that that these things that you're doing, right now, like, and around the kind of racial reckoning and the George Floyd protests and the protests around the election, all of these things. I think a lot of times, you know, it's hard when you're an activist around and you're taking on one particular thing that has happened in this particular period of time to kind of keep the faith that those small wins, or even the fact that you were there in the street, are going to build up towards real change over time. And that's what I feel like we had this incredible opportunity because of finding this footage, you know, to be able to kind of hearten people a little bit with that look back and going, no, look, all this stuff back from the 3rd grade, you know, all the way to the ADA and all the way to today, you know, really made a difference. So we've really tried in our impact campaign to connect the story of the film to the movement of today, which is very, very different than the movement of the 70s. I mean, it's similar too, but there are differences, which is, you know, that the disability justice movement of today is really making an effort to prioritize the leadership and voices of people who've been marginalized within the disability community. So BIPOC people and queer people. And so we've really sort of given our impact campaign platform to that community. And we, you know, have been fortunate enough to have some of its leaders running our campaign and designing these incredible kind of virtual experiences where people are coming and gathering in community, kind of like Camp Jened, you know, with song and instruction and leadership and capacity building and things like that, you know, but to literally like thousands of people from all around the world. So we didn't plan that before the film came out, but that was kind of the community's response to, okay, we're all in a pandemic, but we can gather virtually. We could gather virtually in a really big way, and we could really take advantage of this time, you know, to build the capacity of the movement.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's like a really wonderful example of, you know, what we also want people to take away from the film, which is just like there is so much innovation, creativity, power, and responsiveness and kind of MacGyvering capacity within the disability community, you know, and a lot of the most powerful grassroots solutions that are being found today to all of the problems that we're facing, you know, are coming from that community. So, you know, support it and pay attention to it. Basically.
Yeah, I really want to underline one thing, and that is that I think that there is a universal story that we hope people realize, and that's what Nicole touched upon. It's like, you know, well, and let me say it my way: you don't know what you don't know, right? And you can have these preconceived notions about another community, and you can hear people fighting for things or asking for things, and I think that what people saw in our film is actually understanding much better about what disability is about and disability rights is. And if you had your mind opened just for our community, imagine how you're approaching other communities for which you have resistance to even acknowledging that they have a valid point of view.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. I think as you were saying that, I flashed on the moment in the film. I guess it's up in San Francisco when the Black Panthers came to help the people who were doing the sit-in. I mean, just that moment of, you know, different communities coming together to help each other in ways, you know, unexpected ways. It was like, that's really what the film captures so beautifully. Well, Jim and Nicole, thank you so much for taking time to talk today and to share your story with Film Independent. I really appreciate it. And again, I love the film. For anyone who hasn't seen the film, by chance, I suspect most people watching this have seen it, but if you haven't, go watch it on Netflix. And yeah, best of luck moving forward with this, and stay safe and healthy through this crazy time. And thank you again. I really, really enjoyed talking with both of you.
It's great to talk to you too.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you.